The bus sped down the Cascades like a skier. Then the road flattened. Brent saw a man point. He turned and beheld a peak in the distance that seemed a mirage, impossibly high, snow shimmering on its wide shoulders, the absolute lord of the landscape. The word Rainier passed down the aisles. Brent gawked. It seemed too large, as a full moon does when it first rises into view. He'd never been west of Chicago before. He was sure he was there now. He opened his whirligig book and looked through it between glances out the window. He'd found it in the sixth store he'd try, a dingy bookshop downtown on Wabash Avenue. It was an old, loose-spined hardback called Make Your Own Whirligigs and Weaver Thanes. A previous owner had penciled tiny, masculine-looking notes in the margins. Brent wondered where the man was at that moment and tried to imagine him for his handwriting. He saw a balding head and glasses. Strange, he thought, that he would never recognize each other if they met. He flipped ahead to a whirligig of a man milking a cow. He had read on only the chapter on supplies. He knew he should have tried building one in Chicago, but he hadn't. Once his probation officer had convinced Brent's parents that the trip might help him, he'd been in a rush to leave. He eyed his blue paperbacks pack on the rack and felt separate from all the other passengers. Their luggage held shirts and pants. His held slabs of plywood, a saw, a hand drill, dowels, brass rods, pliers, a cord of varnish, nails, paint. He watched his pack closely, dreading his tools spilling out. He probably had been accused of making bombs. He imagined replying with the truth that he was a builder of whirligigs. Why not? No one knew anything about him. Here was a chance not simply to alter his past, as he'd done in school, but to actually live a different life. He tried out the words in his head. I'm a traveling whirligig maker. It was an interim identity, tied to his previous life. He would cast it off soon, but in favor of what? He was lodged in his own chrysalis, but had no idea what he was turning into. They passed through Preston and then Issaquah. The old man next to Brent was still sleeping. In 24 hours, they hadn't exchanged 10 words. He observed 2 women in front of him, exclaiming over the wallet photos, and marveled at how naturally some people spun lines of connection, turning the world of strangers into family. He opened his wallet, took out Leah's picture, and studied it in solitude. He found her entrancing. She looked Hawaiian, her skin the color of cinnamon, smooth and sanded wood, her forehead high, her hair long and straight. Her eyes were faintly Asian. He probed the photo for new information and now saw that she'd drawn her hair up, shiny and black as obsidian, to the side with a clip. Her dress was white. Or was it only a blouse? He examined the pattern embroidered on the bodice. She wore a gold necklace, fine as a spider silk, but he couldn't see what hung from it. He scrutinized her face from close range, almost felt beneath breath of his face. Strange to think she was now smiling at her killer. Yet she wasn't. Her head was turned at an angle. He stared back into the tearful brown eyes, knowing she would never look back at him, but always off to the side. This was a relief. Her direct gaze would vaporize him with accusation. He turned the photo over and read the full name, Leah Rosalina Santos Zamaro, written in her mother's curly-cued script. She gave him the picture as a model for the whirligigs, along with the disposable camera. Strangely, she wanted photos of them, but didn't want to know what their locations were. The idea of coming upon when she told him, rusted or vandalized or fallen over, lifeless like her daughter, was too foreboding. She preferred to see them in her mind, where they could spin forever, safe from all harm. Suburbs appeared throughout the window. Then the bus nosed its way through the long tunnel and emerged into downtown Seattle. The streets were hilly. Brent glanced the Puget Sound. He wanted a longer view, but the bus turned, following its unusual labyrinth path at the station. He glanced at his United States map. Interstate 90 ended here, and the same road that led all the way back to Chicago, that passed a few miles from his house. He felt himself a departing sailor, leaving sight of land behind. The bus found the station, the brake side. He grabbed his pack and climbed down. His voice sounded odd in his ears when he asked for directions of the water. He tightened down his sleeping bag, struggled it into his pack, and set off, staggering like a grizzly walking upright. It was early July and sunny. He sampled the air, amazed at how light it felt, so different from the weighted, humid heat that he was used to. He followed the bustling Stewart Street, viewing the cars and pedestrians curiously. How like the afterlife it all was. A populous city reached only after a long journey toward the setting sun, here all along, but never until now. Was Leah somewhere here? Walking on, he jerked at the sight of a face vaguely resembling hers, then arrived at the tourist-pronged Pike Place market. He passed up the chance for a squid burger, bought 2 hot dogs instead, and watched a juggler while he ate. The crowds bothered him. It felt more like Chicago than the pristine Pacific Northwest he'd heard of. He'd left, following the signs to the waterfront park. This turned to be piers and amusements. He looked over the water. A line of blue mountains floated above the clouds in the distance. That was the Washington he wanted. Leah's mother hadn't specified where in the 4 states that she should put the whirligigs. He bought a map and some groceries, walked back to the station, and then took the bus north. He got up in Mount Vernon and pored over the map. He broke his promise to his parents not to hitchhike, found a ride with a fisherman heading west, then walked all 3 miles to State Park on the water, only to find the campground was full. He hadn't realized it was 4th of July weekend. Seeing that he'd walked, this ranger suggested he try it if he could share a site. Slowly, Brent meandered through the campground. Every site was a separate country, baseball blaring from the radio in one, while the next was occupied by a couple playing duets on the soprano recorders. It struck him that every family was a universe, with its own peculiar natural laws. Free of his own family, he imagined himself part of each one he passed, trying on identities, like a quick-changed artist. He neared the end of the campground. He paused stealthily, eyeing a bearded man, unloaded his tents from a bicycle. He was tall, fit, looked to be in his 30s, had a thoughtful, sunburned face. The man noticed him, stopped, and turned. Brent felt like a stray dog begging for scraps. I was wondering, his voice rested from disuse. He cleared his throat. If you picked out a corner for yourself, be my guest. I'll pay half the fee, Brent added quickly. No need, glad to have the company. The site was on the water, and more private than most. Brent was pleased. He took off his pack, pried off his sneakers, waded in up to his calves, and washed his face in Puget Sound. It was too late to begin on the whirligig. He pulled out his tent in a tube of plastic meant to hang from ropes strung between the 2 trees. He'd been sent to camp for a few weeks a few times, but not lately, and had never camped out of his own town. He stood up his rope, unable to find flat ground furnished with properly spaced trees. He hoped the cyclist wasn't watching him, and saw his man's dome tent suddenly spring like a magician's illusion. Brent scanned the sky. It didn't look like rain. He put the tent back and unrolled his sleeping bag. And what brings you here? The cyclist asked over dinner. They collaborated on the fire. Brent stirred up his pan of beef and barley soup. Just seeing the country, he answered offhandedly. What about you? Riding from South Canada, headed down this coast to San Francisco, seeing the country like yourself, studying the strange customs of the natives. No offense meant. Where are you from? Prince George, British Columbia, halfway up toward the Yukon. The name raised visions of the far north in Brent's mind. He'd never met a Canadian before and felt like an explorer who just heard tell of an unknown continent. Ever play Go? The man asked. The game? Never heard of it. Like to learn? After dinner, the cyclist produced a folding board and 2 tiny boxes of stones, black and white. It's from China originally, like most things. I'm still learning myself. Brought a book about it to study up on the trip. He gave Brent the white stones, shaped like flying saucers, polished and identical. Supposed to be excellent training for the generals, some say it won the Vietnam War. Wheaties for the brain. He explained the rules and they began to practice the game. The object was to secure territory, arranging groups of stones into living communities, and couldn't be extinguished by your own opponent. Brent felt like he was practicing constructing his new life. Out of nowhere, the word harass came to mind from the Vonnegut book he'd read in English, a term for a desperate group of people linked together without their knowledge. Your family and friends weren't part of your harass. You couldn't choose its members, and you might never know who was in it or what purpose it was. Brent felt certain that Leah was a member of his. Was the cyclist part of his too? Sunset flared orange on the water. Firecrackers began going off. Ah yes, the man said, noise-making devices to spell evil spirits on this important day. Brent couldn't reveal why he'd shared the same distance perspective. This second time around, he saw everything from outside. Much that he'd taken for granted before now struck him as curious. Handshaking, the Pledge of Allegiance, neckties on men's, sport teams named for animals. The sky shifted to shades from the spectrum's outer edges that went black. The cyclist lit a tiny gas lamp, and that hissed and glowed like a shard from a star. By its light, they played another hour, then retired. Brent climbed into his sleeping bag. Radios, firecrackers, voices subsided, replaced the cheering of the crickets, and a breeze passes through the trees and waves steady respiration. The non-human world was emerging, a world he'd rarely noticed, another hidden city. Was Leah now a citizen here? He wondered if the creature he'd heard creeping over the dry leaves could be heard. He imagined her fully fluent here, able to hear and comprehend what he couldn't. Her senses of smell greatly magnified, this bit of shoreline known to her as it never would be to him. He looked up at the stars, glinting silently, a movie without a soundtrack. Or was he simply deaf to their music? He realized he knew no constellations, likewise the names of trees, flowers, rocks, birds, insects, fish. He was a foreigner here. He wished he knew their names. When he awoke, the cyclist was just leaving. It was cold. Brent's bag was damp with dew. Huddling within, waiting for the sun to top the trees and warm the world, he understood why people had worshipped it. 2 hours later, he'd taken a shower, breakfast on French bread and cheese, skimmed 3 chapters of the Whirligig book, and picked the simplest project offer, an angels whose spinning arms played the harp. He studied these diagrams apprehensively. Neither he nor his father were the popular mechanics type. There were practically no tools in his house. Those he'd brought with him had been all bought new. It had been 4 weeks since he'd taken woodshop, where he'd spent weeks on a simple hinged toolbox. Maybe he changed in that time. Maybe Leah and Mrs. Zamara watching him, and he felt Leah and Mrs. Zamara watching him and hoped he had. He walked to his pack. He brought 4 pieces of plywood, 1 foot by 2, marine grade, half an inch thick. He drew one out, sat at the table, and sketched the angel's outline, then erased it all. Freehand drawing was not his forte either. It took half an hour to get it right. He tightened the wood down on the table with a clamp and started its D-shaped coping and promptly broke the thin blade. He inserted the only spare wood he'd brought, feeling like a soldier down to his last bullet. He worked gingerly. The blade survived. The file followed the same path, not only smooth wood, but the wood's edge, but snapped a sizable chunk of the angel's wing. He slammed the file on the table. He hated wood. He took a breath, frightened by his anger in the face of his setback. There was no channel changer here. He picked up the Whirligig book and stared at the previous owner's patient, precise script. He almost felt the man was with him, telling him to settle down and conquer the project calmly, step by step. He sat down. He decided to do without the wing. The figure could simply be a harp player. The harp was full size, the sort you'd find in an orchestra. Leah had played in an orchestra. He wondered what her instrument was. He sawed off the rest of the wing, sanded the wood, and then went back to his pack and dug out 5 tubes of acrylic paint. In the trash can, he found a styrofoam cup, which he filled with water for cleaning the brushes. From the same source, he retrieved a paper plate and used as a palette. He painted one side of the figure, let it dry a bit, then leaned back on the stone and painted the other, making her hair black rather than yellow prescribed by the book. Down one side, he printed Leah's name with black permanent marker, then used it in the tape and measured to draw the harp strings. He considered it his work. It wasn't perfect, especially the outline of the face. It looked nothing like her picture. He repainted the mouth, but only made the matters worse. The 2 sides had been identical, but weren't. It was the best he could do. He stopped and ate lunch. All afternoon was spent on Leah's propeller-shaped arms. He'd begun referring to the Whirligig by her name, and almost felt, when he was reassembling her broken body, reviving her. Each arm required much whittling and sanding. Suddenly, he was halted by the strangeness of his task. He saw it as his parents had. "Why am I doing this?" he said out loud. The whole enterprise seemed taken from a dream, incomprehensible in the light of day.